Today's lecture on reflexes. Today's lecture on reflexes. What is the definition of reflex? Reflex is an involuntary and instantaneous movement in response to a stimulus. So it doesn't require conscious level and it is an automatic response. And this automatic response, instantaneous response, they occur through a reflex arc. Now, what are the types of the reflexes? Clinically, we can divide into superficial reflexes, deep tendon reflexes, and pathological reflexes. One more class, that is visceral reflexes. So we are concerned in our practical, clinically, whether we have to elicit superficial as well as deep reflexes and pathological reflexes. Visceral reflexes you will read in the respective lectures, just like corneal reflexes, conjunctival reflexes, pupillary light reflexes, indirect and the direct light reflexes. Reflex arc consists of 5 components. So there are the 5 components of the reflex arc which form the integrity of reflex arc, and this integrity of the reflex arc is functional unit of a reflex. Why we say it is a functional unit of a reflex? That lesion of any part, any component out of 5, you cannot elicit, you are not able to elicit the reflex properly. So the integrity of the reflex arc is a functional unit of a reflex. So what are the 5 components of the reflex? We must know. First is the receptor. In deep tendon reflexes, it is muscle spindle. Second, the impulses passes through the sensory neuron. That is a second component. Then it may passes to the brain or to the spinal cord, anterior motor neurons. And then there is a third component is the center, integrity center. So the synapse occur between the sensory neuron and the neuron which is present in anterior motor neurons, alpha motor neuron or gamma motor neuron. So the axons of these cells, they constitute motor neuron, and they relay into the effector organ, that is the muscle. This is the 5th component. So there are 5 components. One is the muscle spindle, neuron, sensory neuron, center, efferent neuron, and effector organ. And that constitute the 5 components of an reflex arc. So the question arises, why the reflex is elicited? Number 1, to evaluate afferent integrity. First and very important thing, why you elicit the reflexes? Because to find out the integrity between the 5 components of the reflex arc. And then evaluate the afferent nerve, synaptic connections, motor nerves, descending motor pathway command to the anterior motor neurons, lower motor neurons, whether there is a lower motor neuron lesions, which may cause hyporeflexia, or there may be upper motor neuron lesions which may causes hyperreflexia. So why we elicit the reflexes? To find out the integrity of the 5 components of the reflex arc. So once it is intact, reflex arc is intact, and we are able to elicit the reflexes, then the next point comes the grading of the reflex, whether it is normal or not. This grading is a rather subjective. It is not it is an observation which is depend upon subject wise. Now we can assign it grading from 0 to 4. 0 means no evidence of connection, contraction. So 0, no contraction means no reflex at all. 1 plus grading means it is a reflex is of decreased grade. It is of decreased grade. It means it is present but it is hyporeflexic, and it is usually due to lower motor neuron deficits. So there is a lower motor neuron deficiency at the level of alpha motor neuron from the spinal cord. So the example of this one hyporeflexia 1 plus is Guillain-Barré syndrome. Second grading, it is 2 plus normal. We always compare other reflexes, deep reflexes, with the knee jerk, and we presume that knee jerk response of a normal person is a 2 plus. 3 plus means it is not normal, it is supernormal. It means it is hyperreflexic, and it is due to the motor neuron lesion. It's a multiple example is multiple sclerosis also. 4 plus clonus means stimulus you have applied once, but there is single stimulus, but there is a repeated response in the form of shortening and relaxation, means contraction and relaxation. So once you could not elicit the reflex, then we perform Jendrassik's maneuver. When we could not elicit the reflex, when there is a asymmetrical increase or asymmetrical decrease tone. This word is very important. When the tone is not optimal in physiological muscle function, then we perform the Jendrassik's maneuver. It can be used to augment hyperactive reflexes by doing, if we perform the lower extremity reflexes, then we ask the subject to clasp the hand together and lock the hands together and pull vigorously apart. But once we are doing reflexes for the upper limb, then we can ask clinches the teeth together against each other forcefully. So these are the Jendrassik's maneuver. It can increase the gamma motor neuron discharge. Now the pathological reflexes, under this comes the BABINSKI sign and clonus. Whenever there is a clonus, it is motor neuron disorder or sclerosis. BABINSKI sign means indicate loss of the cortical inhibition. We will go in detail about the pathology. Now this is BABINSKI sign. We also known as plantar extensor reflex. Normal reflex is plantar flexor reflex. So it is a BABINSKI sign, or you can say plantar extensor reflex is a pathological. It is a pathological reflex. It is not a normal. So it is a positive. Plantar positive means BABINSKI sign present. Now this is a sole diagram, and we had to strike the sole from the lateral aspect, from heel to the fifth metatarsopharyngeal joint, and then go medially to the first metatarsopharyngeal joint. Now this stroke should be optimum, and then we will find flexion of the all toes, flexion of the big toe and other toes also. There is adduction, means all the toes they become close together, adduction. Inversion of the foot, and there is a dorsiflexion. This is anatomical dorsiflexion, but it is a plantar flexion here. This is Babinski sign negative. Now when the Babinski sign positive in upper motor neuron lesion, while you strike in this way, you will find falling out of the toes, dorsiflexion of the big toe, flexion at the ankle, and eversion of the foot, not inversion. It is eversion of the foot towards the outer side. Now, once you do all the practical, observation must be prepared in such a way. So the observation table for the various reflexes you must prepare. There is a superficial reflexes from here to here, then visceral reflexes, deep tendon reflexes, afferent nerve supply, center and efferent nerve supply. Then what is the method how you will elicit it, and what is a remark. So all these points you have to explain your reflex observation. Suppose we asked you to do bicep. Biceps reflex is a deep tendon reflex, come under the heading of deep reflex. It is supplied by afferent musculocutaneous, root values C5, C6, cervical 5 and cervical 6 segment. Again, efferent nerve is the same musculocutaneous nerve. This point is clear? And the method how you will do, the slightly flexed bicep belly, slightly, and press the tendon with the thumb, and the hammer, pointed end of the hammer has to strike on the second tip of the second phalanx, and then second phalanx, and then you will find contraction of the bicep. So this is the monosynaptic reflex. What we elicit here is the monosynaptic reflex. Now this is a monosynaptic, means one synapse is present. A stretch reflex because you have to make it stretch, slightly stretched. So what are the sequences which occur in the monosynaptic stretch reflex? Summary is here. The passive stretch of the muscle produced by trapping a tendon, then intrafusal stretching of the muscle spindle occur. Second point, once the stretching of the spindle distort its central region, then it stimulates sensory nerves. Action potential is generated and conducted by afferent nerve to the spinal cord. And this axons of the sensing neuron synapse with the dendrites or of the motor neuron, somatic motor neuron. So the axons of this motor neuron, they passes through the ventral horn, gray matter of the spinal cord. These motor neurons are situated in the ventral horn, but the axons, they passes through the ventral root of the spinal nerves, and they supply the extrafusal muscle fibers. So the extrafusal muscle fibers supplied by alpha motor neuron. Further steps is that acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter which releases from the ending of the alpha motor neuron, which stimulates the contraction of the extrafusal fibers, and there is a contraction of the extrafusal muscle belly. Once there is a contraction of the muscle, it relieves the stretch of the muscle spindle. Once there is a relieves the stretch of the muscle spindle, they decrease electrical activity in afferent sensing nerve fibers, and it will terminate the stretch reflex, and there is no contraction. So, by sending the command to the motor neuron, the brain set a muscle's length. By sending command to the motor neuron means the projection from the alpha motor neuron to the extrafusal fibers, brain set a muscle length. So the muscle length is remain optimal. So stretch reflex makes sure the muscle stay at that definite length which is assigned by the higher centers. So stretch reflex is important for maintaining muscle tone and the length. Here you will find once there is stimulatory response to alpha motor neuron, here is the inverse autogenic inhibition to the other group. So this is a very important role of Golgi tendon organ in lengthening reaction. This can be seen in decerebrate rigidity, just above the vestibular nuclei when you cut the brain stem. So no connection between the cortical area and the lower brain stem here, part of the brain stem. So where you will find extension of the limbs. When there is a Golgi tendon stimulation, there is extension of the limb in decerebrate rigidity. And this is due to the spastic contraction of the extensor muscles. They remain contracted. And now, due to increased discharge of gamma motor neuron, so they remain contracted, and we can see only in decerebrate animal an extension of the limbs. So what is this? It is due to the increased discharge of motor neuron. Another reflex which can elicit this lengthening reaction is clasp-knife reflex or Phillipson reflex. This is the Phillipson reflex. This is because of Phillips. Is the first scientist who described this reflex. Now the forceful flexion of an forearm in a decerebrate animal, when we flex the arm forcefully in a decerebrate animal, then the resistance to flexion is abolished suddenly, and it is leading to the quick flexion of the arm, and this is due to the activation of the Golgi tendon organ of the arm. Is due to the activation of the Golgi tendon organs of the arm muscles. And now this is called clasp-knife reflex or Phillipson reflex. So it is a resistance to the flexion is abolished suddenly, and this is also the role of Golgi. Thanking you, and subscribe for the next.